Hello everyone, so in this tutorial we're going to populate our table here of pizza toppings once you've selected a pizza. So if you select a cheese pizza, we're going to fill in this table by connecting to the database. Now this tutorial is probably going to be kind of a little beasty. It's going to be a big one, but I think it's going to, it's going to make sense. So let's get right to it. So here's where we left off with our source code here. And essentially, we will first start by creating another class. So if you remember in the last video we made the pizza types class, we're basically just going to go through the same process again. But this time, we're going to make a class for the pizza toppings. And the reason we're doing this is because, not pi as, just pi, is because when we pull the pizza toppings from the database, we're going to want to store all of those toppings for each pizza in some kind of an object so we can do stuff with it. So we will start just as we did before by making a class, and we'll call it pizza toppings. All right. And then what we'll do is we'll basically just make the constructor first, just as we did before. And we know that the constructor, for our case here, is going to take in a couple of sort of attributes or properties here. And to remember what it is we're going to, which ones we're going to do, I'm going to open up phpMyAdmin again. Let's see here. Do I got this open up here? Yes, I do. So let me just drag this over here to show everybody. Here it is. So we're going to want to make attributes for each of these columns right here. So pizza topping ID, type ID, probably won't end up using, well, we won't end up using this one probably, but just in case this database gets bigger, we'll probably just end up getting these ones, but we'll take all of them just in case, because you never know. If you make the object with all the data, then you can always just use it if you find you need it later, and that can be super handy. So we know that the first one was pizza topping ID, and then the type ID, oops, and then we had sauce, and then we had meat, cheese, and veggies. So that's going to be our constructor. And if you remember from the last video when we made our class, you can then sort of set the sort of private attributes or properties to these items from the constructor. It's just so we don't have to sit here and watch me type out a bunch, because there's a few more in this one. I will just copy and paste that over here, because I've already prepared it. So this goes a little bit faster. There we go. And I'm going to have to tab this over a bit. And I don't know why this one went all weird like that, but tab that back over like that. And there we go. I feel like, do we have a typo in this? Class, pizza toppings. Ah, here's the typo. This is a semicolon, and it should be just a colon. There we go. So then we're going to need some getters, right? And this is just like we did in the last video. In order to access these attributes, we have a set of methods. And again, I'm not going to type them all out because they're pretty much the same. If you're familiar with something like Eclipse with Java, they can, or even like Android development, if you're using Android Studio, you can like, you can just make your constructor, and then you can just generate all the getters and setters automatically. I'm not sure if there's a way to do that in PyCharm, but if anyone knows, please let me know, because that would help me out a lot, because I'm manually typing these all out. But yeah, just to help us with this, we'll speed it up by just copying and pasting. But you can pause the video and copy these down if you want. I guess we could potentially try to make a Python program that would generate our getters and setters for us. As you know, I have to tab this over because it was one too many indented, and then you can see the colors come back to the right area. So just to kind of go over this, we've got our constructor that we're going to take in all those columns from the database. From here, all this data here will be, each one of these rows will be its own object, and we'll construct it by putting in the data into these, and then it'll set these private attributes here. Then when we later want to access those attributes, we'll use these getters methods, these get methods, to to access each of these attributes and ultimately displayed in that table. So that's good. So we've got this set up. So the next thing we're going to want to probably do is we could look at the controller and maybe add stuff to the controller, but I think it's going to make more sense if we go over to our main method here. And in the main method, what we're going to want to do is, well, first what we're going to want to do is, if you realize when we start this up, we don't just want 1, 2, 3, 4. We want these to be names, right? We want these to be headings. So we're going to set those column headings before we even start grabbing stuff from the database. So we made this nice initialize method. So in the initialize method, we can initialize the column headings as well. So in order to do that, we need to know what we called our table. And if you open up our Qt Designer here, and I've already got our project open in Qt Designer, we can click on the table and remember, okay, we called it TW pizza toppings for table widget pizza toppings. So I'm going to copy that over right over here, because we're going to need to use that with this method. So we're going to call self dot and then paste the name of the object, the table widget. And we do want this to be tabbed over inside of the initialize method, not outside. And then we can call the set horizontal header item. And how this method works is it's going to take the column, it's going to take the row. It's going to take the column. Let me write this out so it makes more sense. This position here is going to be the column, and then this position here is going to be the column's name. Okay, so that's how this method works. So our first column is going to be column 0, right? And then the column name for column 0 that we want is going to be sauce. Okay. And then what we can do is we can copy and paste this a few times, 4 times to be exact, because then the column 1, 2, and 3. Okay, and then we want the sauce to be, we want this to be meat, and we want this to be the cheese, and then we want this to be the veggies. So there we go. So let me just play this, and then we'll let's run this, and we're gonna get some errors here apparently. So let's take a look what's going on here. Type error, set horizontal header item, self. Okay. Okay, yeah. So so this is correct. This is going to be the column number and then the column name. But what we need to call in front of this is we got to call the Qt widgets dot Q table widget, I believe. Yeah, table widget item. There it is. And set that item to sauce. So again, we have to just call Qt widgets dot Q table item. And I'll just painfully manually type these out for everybody here. Qtable widget item. Hopefully I'm not making some massive typo. Oh boy. And let's do this again. Qt widgets dot Qtable. You can't just put in the string. You've got to set the item to this. So let's try this again. Let's run this again. And there we go. So now we have sauce, meat, cheese, and veggies. And we've done that again. So if I just bring that up again. So this was column 0. And we're going to set this column 0 item to sauce. This is column 1. And we're going to set that to meat, right? Column 0 is sauce. Column 1 is meat. Column 2 is cheese. And column 3 is veggies. So now we've got that filled in. We can start to query our database. But in order to query our database, we're going to need to know what pizza type we have, right? So we can query, okay, great. So which pizza are we going to display in there? And that's going to be decided by the drop-down list. So if someone picks a cheese pizza, right? This is a deluxe pizza. We need to get type ID 2 somehow out of that drop-down list. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do that by setting a global list, right? We're going to go up here and we're going to set a global list, and I'm going to call it list of pizzas because that's what this is going to be a list of. And we've already got that list. As soon as we, in the last tutorial, we called, this controller and this method, which is here, and this connects to the database and selects all of the pizza types, and it puts it into this list. So now what we want to do is we want to make this a global variable, and to do that we just have to put global and list of pizzas. So what this means is when we get the list of pizzas that we're going to put in the drop-down list, we're going to also make it a global list up here so we can call it in other methods. Okay, so that's what's happening here. So now, not only do we have this list of pizzas displayed in our combo box, but we've also got it available in our global list when the program runs. Because as soon as the program runs, we're going to run this init method and fill this pizza list. It's initially empty, but as soon as we run this and get the data from the database, we fill it and set this variable, and in so doing, we also set this global variable as well. And then we can use this global variable in other methods, and that's what we're actually going to do to make this happen. So we've got our global method, and now what we can do is define another method down here called something like pizza selected, because this is going to be the selected pizza from the drop-down list. So what we're going to need to do first then is get the index of the combo box from the drop-down list or combo box that is selected. And I know this may not make sense right now, but it'll come together here. You'll kind of understand what I mean. So what we're going to do is we're going to go self dot and whatever our combo box name was, which is here, combo box pizza types. So we're going to grab that, and we're going to get the current index. Okay, this is the index that has just been selected by the user. Okay, and we're going to store that index in a variable here. And then what we're going to do is with that index, we're going to get the selected pizza. Okay, and remember, this list is a list of objects and a list of pizza type objects, right? This list is a list of these objects, and each object has the type ID and the name, which is good because that's what we want. So we're going to get the selected pizza by accessing this global list that we just did. So we can call this global list of pizzas, and what we can do is grab this combo box pizza index and put that into here. All right, so let me just run this. Hopefully it runs and there's no errors. Yeah, so what I'm kind of trying to get at here is this is essentially this kind of list in this drop down list is identical to this global list that we made up here, right? Because this combo box list comes from this list of pizzas, and we use this for loop to populate it. So this list of pizzas is identical to this list here. So that means that cheese pizza object is in index 0. Deluxe pizza object is in index 1, and this is in index 3 and index 4. So when we grab the current index, right? So if the person selects pepperoni, for example, that's going to be index 0, 1, 2. That's the second index. So we're going to, that's what this method does. It grabs the second index, which is pepperoni, right? 0, 1, 2. And it takes this second index, and we're going to grab the object out of this list. So just to kind of maybe make this a little more clear, what I'll do is I'll just temporarily comment this out. And what we'll do is we'll print the combo box pizza index. But right now, we don't have a way of actually triggering this method, right? We're not calling this method ever yet. It's just there. So in order to call this method, what we need to do is connect that combo box to a trigger. So what we'll do to do that is we'll say self dot the combo box name, which is CB pizza types, dot, and this is going to be current index changed. Okay, so when the current index is changed, we're going to want to connect it to a method. And the method that we're going to connect it to is the method we're making right down here. This one right here, pizza selected. So let's put that there. So what this means is when the current index changes on this drop-down list, which means someone's clicked it and changed it, we're going to call this method. And what we're going to do once we call this method is we're going to get the current index, and we're just going to print it into the console to prove to ourselves that this is actually working. So we'll rerun this. So now we said pepperoni was 0, 1, 2. So when we click pepperoni, you can see down in the console we've got 2 because that is the selected index. So now what we can do is we can uncomment this. Let's just stop running that program. And then now let's print selected pizza. Now this is an object, so we're just going to get where it's stored in memory, but that's okay because let's prove that that's working. So if we grab this pepperoni, boom, there it is. This is the object and where it's stored in memory. Now that's not super helpful for us, so let's get the name. So we have the method, the getter, get name, and if we run this again and we select pepperoni, you can see we've actually selected the pepperoni pizza. And because we made this an object, right, it's got more than just the name. We can also use the get type ID getter. And what we can do is we'll just replace this with that. And what we're going to do here is you'll see is we're going to grab the type ID of this pepperoni pizza. Now let's refresh our memory. What is the type ID of a pepperoni pizza? Here it is. Type ID is 3. Okay, so it's an index 2, but the type ID is 3. So when we select pepperoni, we see the type ID is 3, which is great. So this is good. This is working so far. This is pulling the data that we want out of that drop-down list. And we've set up the trigger up here, so that's great. So that works. So now that we've done that, we want to basically store this ID into a variable. So we just don't need to print it. What we need to do is store it into another variable, and we can call it the pizza type ID because that's what it is, and we'll store that into this variable. And what we're going to do is we're going to pass that variable to our controller method. So we already have the controller up here. So what we can do is we can go PTC, right, the pizza types controller, and we're going to call pizza types controller, but we haven't made the method yet. So let's go over there and do that now. And let's go to the controller, and we're going to add a new static method that's going to connect to the database and grab us our pizza types, pizza toppings. So we go static method, and then we're going to define, and we're going to call this maybe, let me see here, what should we call it? Get pizza toppings, that would make sense. Get pizza toppings, because that's exactly what it's doing. And in this case, we're going to want to pass it the type ID, because we're going to select the specific, we're not just going to select all of the pizza toppings, we just want the pizza toppings for that specific pizza. So we're going to pass it that type ID that we made over here, that we grabbed over here. So that's what we're going to do eventually. But let's round out this method first. So again, we're going to do a try so that if the program, for some reason, this doesn't work, it doesn't connect to the database, it doesn't just crash, it'll just throw an exception instead. And again, we're going to make a list of pizza toppings. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, Simon, there's only one pizza topping that we're going to grab back. Okay, we don't need it to be a list because we're only grabbing one row of data. And you're right, that's right. But sometimes, and this is maybe more for general in other programming language, when you have a big database that you're dealing with, and you've got many, many tables, and you think to yourself, well, there's only one row of data. There's only one row. Like you'll think to yourself here, let's go back to this. You think to yourself, okay, there's only one row of data. And in this case, it's so simple, we can see that. But sometimes you have so many tables and so many rows of data, you can't just look at it and see that there's only one row of data. And sometimes there can be 2 rows. Even though there's not supposed to be 2 rows of data or 3 rows of data, sometimes things get duplicated for some weird reason. And it just depends. So it can be good to kind of bring back everything depending on the purpose of your tool, right? Is your tool, and in this case, this is maybe for the front-end user, so you don't really want them to have to see 2 different toppings for the same pizza because that's confusing. But maybe if this is a monitoring tool for people monitoring something, they might want to see, oh, for some reason, maybe they're debugging something, and they want to, they select a pizza. I mean, maybe it won't be pizzas, but if they select one pizza and then it returns 2 rows, all of a sudden that helps you troubleshoot the situation. So I always like to return a list, even though it's going to be just 1 row of data, because you never know, just in case something is happening, then you can catch it. Because if you only return 1, then it'll only return 1 row, but there could be 2, and then you're left even more confused. But if we put it in a list and there's just 1 row, that's fine. We'll just return the 1 row anyway. So that's sort of what I'm thinking there. That's sort of my thought process. And you know what? I'm not sure if that's like a best practice. If people, have better practices to address that, please let me know. Please let me know, because that would be great. So we're going to do our DB connection, and we're going to get connection again. And then from this connection, we're going to make a cursor. Okay, and I'm going to save that into the variable cursor. Great. And then what we're going to do is we're going to execute a SQL query, because we're connected to a MySQL database, so we're going to use SQL. And we will select, let's select everything, right, all columns from the toppings table, where, so this is where the where comes in. The type ID is equal to a specific value, right? So just to kind of go through what's going on with the SQL, we're selecting everything. So all columns, we're selecting in this row specifically, we're going to select all these columns of data where the pizza type ID equals, like, for example, 2. So then we would get the pizza topping ID, the type ID, the sauce, the meat, the cheese, the veggies for this row. And that's where this where is coming in. So basically all columns where the type ID equals specifically whatever type ID and for that row. Now, this is going to change, right? This is going to change depending on what the user has selected. And I'm going to put in %s, and we're going to do what's called bind param, because if we just hard code in the type ID into here, this leaves you vulnerable to what's called a SQL injection, because then people can start. Now, in this situation, it's probably really unlikely because we have a drop-down list. There's no input field, but you always want to be careful, because if people can start injecting SQL attacks, they can drop tables, they can select, do selects and get user. If this was a table, this is just a pizza topping table, but if this was a users table and it had usernames and passwords, I mean, even if the passwords are hashed, you could get you could get hacked basically, and people could, these hackers could steal information from your database. So bind paramming basically prevents a SQL injection by, even if someone puts actual SQL code into this last parameter, it won't read it as an actual command. Now, I believe in PyMySQL the way to do this is you basically do that, and then you put your type ID, the parameter that you want to bind to this section here. Now, I think that's how you do it, but if this is incorrect, please let me know in the comments to correct this. And you should probably double check yourself, just in case, if you're using this sort of thing for something more serious. Definitely double check how to protect yourself from SQL injection, because I'm not completely sure if this is the right way to do it. So that's always something to look into. So once we've done that, we can loop through this, and we will, let's just print the row to see if this is actually working, right? Because we're doing a lot of coding and we're not really checking if this is working. So we'll just round out the exception by going exception as E, and then we'll print the exception if we get one. And then finally, we'll want to close the connection. So connection.close. So we still have to actually call this method though. So what we're going to do over here is, now we've got that method, so we'll go .get pizza toppings. And again, we have to pass in a type ID, and PyCharm's nice enough to let us know that we need to. So here's our pizza type ID. We're going to pass that into here. And right now, we're just hopefully going to print it to the console. So let's see if that works. So we're going to select, let's say, pepperoni. And good, it works. We see that we have selected pepperoni. And if we look at the table, for pepperoni, we have, this was a pepperoni, right? pepperoni. So we have 3, tomato, pepperoni, mozzarella, and no veggies. So we can see here, yeah, 3, tomato, pepperoni, mozzarella, and no veggies. So that's good. That means this successfully connected to the database and we pulled the data. So instead of just printing it to the console, we don't want to do that. We're going to want to make a new object, a pizza toppings object. So pizza toppings, I'll call it that. And did we import? We have not imported it yet. So we made the object. So from models, we are going to import the pizza toppings as, and we'll call it PT lowercase o for pizza toppings. All right. So then we'll go PTO dot pizza toppings dot, and what we'll do is we're not going to do any methods. We're just going to use the constructor to construct it. So we can just grab the rows because we know they're in the same order when we made them. What I mean by that is the order of this constructor. We'll copy that and paste it over here so we know. Just comment it out with a hashtag, and then those. This order we put in matches the order we put in here. Okay, so because those match, we can just go row 0, and then we'll go row, because basically the row is just a list of, it's just a list. So we can access the row and then column 0, row column 1. And that row column 0 will associate with the pizza topping ID, and so on and so forth. So then we'll go 2, and then we'll go row 3, and then we'll go row 4. And is that enough? Let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So one more. And then row 5. Okay. So now we've filled our pizza toppings object, and what we want to do with that is append it to this list. So list of pizza toppings dot append, and we will append the objects that we just made, the pizza toppings objects. It probably doesn't have to be plural. It's just a pizza topping for a pizza. Well, maybe it should be plural because there's multiple pizza toppings on a pizza, so we'll do that. Good, so now we have appended to this list. And finally, all we have to do is return this list, and we'll just return list of pizza toppings. So this list will be returned over to our main function, or in our main file, to this get pizza toppings function that we called. So right now we're just calling it, but now it's, when we just called it initially, we were printing to the console, but now we're actually returning that list. So we need to receive that list. So we'll say list of pizza toppings equals the return value of this method is going to be inside of this variable now. And now we can populate our table with this list. And by table, I mean this table right here. So in order to do that, we just have to we first have to set the row count to 0. And I'm not really sure why we have to do this, but this is the only way I was able to get this to work. If there's better ways to set this table up, please let me know. But we have to copy this object name again from the table widget. And then we will set, okay, we're going to set row count. And we're going to set row count to 0. And then we're going to loop through the list, and we're going to enumerate this list. So row number, and this is the part that we're enumerating, and then we have the row data, and this is the actual data, that the objects that are in the list. We're going to enumerate, and I just want to make sure I spell this right. That's right, and then we will enumerate through the list of pizza toppings. So I know I was always really confused initially when I saw this, but in a normal for loop, for example, in this loop, we just go through the list, and whatever is in that list, we put into X. So let's just view that part of it. So for whatever's in the list of pizza toppings list, we're going to put it in row data. I could have easily called this X as well, but that's not as descriptive as row data because this will be the row data. This enumerate function then, all it does is starts to count the row numbers. So it'll start at 0, and then 1, and then 2, and then 3, as it goes through the list. So perhaps to prove that point, what we can do is we can just print row number, and you'll see that all that does is so it enumerates or just counts how many things are in the list starting from, I believe, 0. So let's check that out. So we'll let's pepperoni, and yeah, so there's only one thing in this row because there's only one thing in the list and it starts at 0. If we look at the row data now, if we go row data, that'll just be the object. So we're going to need to call dot, let's get the cheese type. So if we rerun this program and we get pepperoni, and then it returns the cheese type. So that's sort of how this is working. But we don't just want to print to the console. We want to fill the table up. So what we'll do is we'll go self dot table widget pizza toppings, because that's the name of the table widget object. And what we're going to need to do first is insert the row number. So the row number that we're going to initially start with is 0, and there's only going to be one row. But let's say you had multiple rows of data you want to return, then it's going to start, okay, row 0, and then as it loops through, it'll go row 1, and it's just setting up the row numbers. And then we're going to, again, call the object, and then we're going to insert the actual item, and we're going to do that by set item. And then how we set items in a table is first we give it the row number. So very similar, but not exactly the same to what we did here, because we need to add in the row number. So we're going to add in the row number, and then we're going to say which column are we adding this data to, and we're going to say 0. And in 0 we know there's this sauce. So what we want to do then is, again, we want to go qt widgets dot q table widget item. And then we will just put in the row data dot, and we know that this is sauce, so we're going to get the sauce, just like that. So just to go through this again, we're starting with row 0, initially, and then so we've set row 0, and then to row 0 in column 0, we're going to add the sauce name. Okay, and I know this is kind of confusing maybe, but I'm sure once we kind of start actually seeing how this works, hopefully it'll start clearing that up. So we also want to add to row number 0 and column 1, right, the meat type. So we're going to get meat. So instead of getting the sauce, let's get meat. And then we'll just do this again for row number 0, still in row number 0, but column 2, which as we made up here is the cheese, we want to get cheese and set that item. And then finally, we're going to want to get the veggies. So row 0 still, but column 3, we're going to want to set that column to get veggies. Okay, so that's how we're kind of building the table. This is sort of like the X and the Y coordinates, and inside of the X and Y coordinates, we want to put this item. So row number 0, which is sort of the X coordinate, Y coordinate here, 0, we want to put this item. And we go so on and so forth. And if you had more rows of data, it would just say, okay, for row 1, right, because it starts at 0, for row 0, we just did it. Then for row 1, we want to set, again, column 0 to whatever, column 1 to whatever, and then it would loop through and go to row 2, and it just would continue to fill your table. In our situation, we only have one row of data, so it's only going to loop through it one time. But this could easily be scaled up to many rows of data. So let's test this out. So we'll hit play, and then what we'll see here is if we hit, let's say, a pepperoni pizza, okay, so it looks like it crashed, and okay, let's see why. So it crashed, but it didn't tell us why, and it crashed when we changed the index. So one way we can kind of try to start troubleshooting this is we can throw in a try and except, and we can try to catch the exception. Okay, so we'll just go try except exception as E, and then we'll print E. Okay, so let's see if that will catch our exception for us. If we go here, yeah, so, okay, Qt widget object has no attribute, insert row. Yeah, so that's a typo. Insert row here, there should be a T. Okay, we can just leave these try catches here. We could remove them now, but I'm sure that's going to fix it. So if we hit pepperoni, there we go. So we can see here now, pepperoni, the sauce is tomato, meat is pepperoni, and so on and so forth. And we've got this filled properly. Now, one interesting thing you might be noticing here is when we initially hit it, hit the run button, we've got cheese selected, but nothing is here. So a problem is, okay, so you could select one and then you could go back and select cheese. Okay, there it is, but that's not a great user experience. So how we can address this is essentially just in our initialize method, we can just immediately call the pizza selected method. So once we've initialized everything, all we have to do is call self.pizza selected. So as soon as we run this, as soon as we hit run and we start this program, we're going to, settle, we're going to set the combo box, then we're going to set the table headers, then we're going to kind of put this listener activated, and then we'll call this method. And it'll immediately select the current index, which is set to cheese, which is our 0 index, and then it will just fill it as if cheese was selected right away. So that we just have to call this method in our initialize. So if we hit play now, we can see, oh, okay, so it didn't run it here. What? Okay, because this is a method, so I believe I need to put the brackets there. Yeah, there we go. So we can see now the cheese pizza was automatically selected, even though we just opened the program. So just to see that again, if we hit run, we'll see the program, automatically populates with cheese. Okay, so that's it for this video. We've got the table filling with our selected drop-down list pizza type. In the next video, the next video will probably be pretty short. It'll just be making this order button, essentially just change this. Maybe we'll, I don't know. That actually might be it, so it might be super short in the next video, but this one's probably getting pretty long. So thanks for all the support with your subscriptions and likes, and I'll see you in the next one.